Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I wish I could stand here today and tell you that the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, had worked. I wish I could sit here and tell you today that the American people were better off as a result of the Affordable Care Act. But I can't do that. And it gives me no joy in having to make that statement. Now, as you know, Mr. President, not a single Republican voted for the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was passed at President Obama's suggestion by the Democratic members of the House and the Senate. They had a majority, and in this body, the majority rules. And I don't want to ascribe to the President or to our Democratic friends any ill motives whatsoever. They wanted what was best for the American people. It wasn't a question of bad motives. It was just a bad idea. It didn't work. And let me say this another way. I believe that President Obama and our colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle in the United States Senate and in the United States House of Representatives passed Obamacare with the best of intentions. But you know what? 150 years ago, Mr. President, I know you also happen to be a physician, 150 years ago, doctors used to bleed their patients with the best of intentions. And they stopped doing that. They did it. They didn't have any bad motives in doing it. They did it because they thought it would help the patient. It killed many of them. So they stopped doing it. You know, we were told when the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, I don't mean any disrespect in calling it Obamacare. President Obama himself refers to it as Obamacare. When the United States Congress, the Democrats in the United States Congress passed Obamacare, I remember well what we were told because I wanted to believe it. The president said, I'm going to quote, he said, if you like your insurance plan, you can keep your insurance plan. I think he meant that at the time. It just wasn't true. Turned out not to be true. The president said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. I think that's what he wanted, but you couldn't. He said the Affordable Care Act would, quote, cover every American and cut the cost of a typical family's premium by up to $2,500 a year. Not even close. He said, President Obama said Obamacare would, quote, bend the cost curve for health care. He said, without adding, quote, one dime to the deficit. None of that was true. I think the president meant it at the time. I think he wanted it at the time. I know I did. I know you did, Mr. President. But it just turned out not to be true. Now, the simple fact of the matter is, and I think every reasonable person has to conclude, that the Affordable Care Act has not worked for the American people. Let's talk about the exchanges. As you know, Mr. President, there are two parts of the Affordable Care Act. There are the exchanges through which people go and buy insurance directly from an insurance company. And then there's the Medicaid expansion. I want to talk about the exchanges for a moment. In 2016, under Obamacare, we started out with 281 insurance companies offering insurance to the American people. Good start. The problem is now we have 141, and they're dropping like flies. In my state, in Louisiana, we're down to 3. A third of all of the counties in America have only one choice, one insurance company that will still write insurance. And many of our counties have zero, none, nada, zilch. They can't get insurance at all. They've been given a bus ticket, but there's no bus. In Louisiana, let me talk just for a moment about my state, our state, Mr. President. In Louisiana, premiums have gone up 123% on the exchanges since 2013. That's an average of $3,600 increase per plan. Nationwide, the average Obamacare plan now costs 105% more than when it started. That's $3,000 per person. And what's particularly incredible to me, Mr. President, you know these statistics better than I do. In Louisiana, we have 136,000 people who, rather than buying insurance off the exchanges, have chosen to pay the fine. Let me say that again. 136,000 people in my state have looked at the insurance offered to them with the subsidies and said, we'd rather pay the fine. Of that 136,000 who said, I'll pick the fine instead of the insurance, of that 136,000, 84% of them make $50,000 or less. 48% of them, half, make $25,000 or less. Now, you know what that tells me? That tells me that 136,000 people in my state, most of whom are too poor to be sick, looked at the Affordable Care Act plan and said, we can't afford it. We'd rather pay the fine. We're better off paying the fine. So they're out of pocket the money for the fine, and they still don't have insurance. No reasonable person would call that a success. Let me give you a couple more examples, Mr. President, because we talk around here in concepts, and we all know what we're talking about, but the average American who gets up every day and goes to work and obeys the law and pays his taxes or her taxes and tries to do the right thing by their kids and tries to save some money for retirement, they don't have time to deal in concepts. They're too busy earning a living. They just want to know, what kind of health insurance do I have and what's it going to cost? So let me give you some examples right now from Louisiana. This is brought to you by the Affordable Care Act. Let's suppose I'm a 60-year-old, non-smoking male living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm making $50,000 a year, Mr. President. According to healthcare.gov, I didn't make this up. According to healthcare.gov, the cheapest and most basic plan available to me would cost me $689.14 a month with a $4,500 deductible for a grand total of $9,000 a year. Deductible, my out-of-pocket plus my premiums. Now, I'm 60 years old. I'm living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the cost of living isn't that high. I'm making $50,000, and the federal government has said, we've got a great deal for you. Give us $9,000, and then we might be able to give you some health care. For that $9,000, what do I get? Let's suppose I say, okay, here's my $9,000. I don't know where I'm going to find it. I'm only making $50,000 a year, and of course the government's taking some of that for taxes. But I find $9,000 a year. You know what I get? I get 4 doctor visits. I get 2 lab tests. I get 9 prescription drugs and additional medical costs for a grand total of $100. That's not insurance, Mr. President. That's giving somebody a bus ticket without a bus. All right, let's suppose I'm a 50-year-old female. I don't smoke. I'm living in Lafayette, Louisiana, which, as you know, is to the west of Baton Rouge. I'm making $50,000 a year over in Lafayette. The most basic plan in Lafayette, once again, I'm 50 years old, so I'm not 60 now. I'm 50 years old. I'm a female. I don't smoke. The most basic plan, the cheapest plan I could get, would cost me $450 a month in premiums with a $4,800 deductible for a grand total of $6,550. So I've got to come into my pocket for $6,550 before I can get any kind of health insurance. Mr. President, that's not health insurance. And I would remind you, you know this, Mr. President, as a physician who's been on the front lines caring for people in our charity hospital system in Louisiana, and God bless you for that. You know as well as I do that the options I just described, they're the cheap ones. They're the most affordable ones. That's the best case scenario. Nobody wanted this, Mr. President. I know President Obama didn't want it to turn out this way. I know our friends on the Democratic side didn't. They wanted what was best for America. It wasn't a bad motive. It's just a bad idea. What do we need, Mr. President? Everybody has their own opinion of that. That's what we're going to try to convince each other of over the next few days as we vote. I'll tell you what I think we need. I think in the healthcare delivery system, we don't need more government. I know some of my friends on the Democratic side, they think they have the solution. And I respect them for all the time and care they've put into this. But some of my friends on the Democratic side say we've got the solution. Government has failed, we'll admit. They don't say it very loudly, but they'll privately say, we realize government has failed with Obamacare. And our prescription to fix it is more government. So let's go to a single-payer system. Let's have the federal government be in charge of everybody's health care. And let's let the federal government regulate our doctors and our nurses and our hospitals and our health insurance companies and our patients and our lab techs like they were utilities. Mr. President, I've lived under a system like that. England has a system like that. You can't name me a single G20 country, not one, that has a single-payer system that's working. It's not. It's not the answer. Mr. President, quickly, because I'm running out of time here, here's what we need.
The senator's time has expired.
I will conclude then, Mr. President. Thank you for your time and attention. America needs a health care delivery system and deserves it like somebody designed the dadgum thing on purpose.
Mr. President.